After losing his wife in a tragic accident, a cold and distant billionaire locked himself inside his enormous mansion with his twin sons, both left paralyzed from the waist down. He tried everything to bring normal life back again, hiring nurses, caregivers and housekeepers from the best agencies money could buy, but none of them lasted. Some quit within days. Others ran away in tears, unable to bear the silence, the tension, or the strange sadness that haunted every corner of that house. "Sir, I can't stay here," one maid whispered, trembling as she packed her bags. "This place, it feels cursed." In just 2 weeks, 25 employees were gone. The man had stopped believing that anyone could help his broken family, until one ordinary woman walked through those mansion doors and did something no one else ever could. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and tell us where you're watching from. After the violent crash that took his wife's life, Charles had withdrawn from everything: business, friends, even the world beyond his front gate. He lived only for routine now, endless meetings with doctors, silent meals, and sleepless nights spent in his study surrounded by dusty family portraits he couldn't bring himself to remove. The mansion, once full of light and laughter, had turned into a museum of grief. Each hallway whispered memories of better days, photographs of family vacations, birthday parties, and smiling faces still hung on the walls, now nothing more than haunting reminders of what had been lost. Liam and Ethan no longer played, laughed, or even argued. Their wheelchairs had become permanent fixtures beside the tall windows overlooking the empty garden. Day after day they sat there, eyes unfocused, barely speaking to anyone. Their silence frightened the staff more than their condition ever could. Charles's presence didn't help. He avoided looking at them for too long because in their faces he saw his wife, and every time it tore him apart. He told himself that distance was protection, that silence was strength. But deep down, he knew it was cowardice. Every worker who entered the house could feel it, the weight of unspoken pain pressing down on every wall. They came with good intentions, but within days that goodwill melted into unease. Some said they felt watched. Others described nightmares, as if something in the house refused to let anyone rest. One nurse left without a word after just 48 hours. A cleaner fainted during her second shift and never returned. Even the head butler, a man who had served the Westfields for decades, submitted his resignation in trembling hands. Charles pretended not to care. He replaced each of them within hours. But the truth was, every departure felt like confirmation of a terrible fear, that his family was beyond saving. His daily routine became mechanical. He woke at dawn, signed papers, met the staff, and then sealed himself in his office until nightfall. The twins' laughter, once the sound that defined the house, had vanished completely. The Westfield estate stood silent atop its hill, its marble corridors cold and lifeless. And then, on a grey, rain-soaked Monday, a new figure appeared at the gates. Her name was Sophia Hale. Her umbrella was half broken. Her clothes were simple. Her shoes carried traces of city dust. But her eyes, calm and unafraid, told a different story. She stood patiently at the iron gates, clutching a small, worn-out bag. When the butler opened the door, she nodded politely and stepped inside. The mansion swallowed her whole. The silence hit immediately, heavy and cold. But Sophia didn't flinch. She looked around, taking in the enormous staircase, the chandeliers, the smell of polish and loneliness. At the top of the stairs stood Charles Westfield, motionless, watching her with the detached stare of a man who had long stopped expecting anything good. He didn't speak, didn't offer a welcome. To him, she was just the 26th attempt, another name soon to be erased. He gave her no warmth, no guidance, only a brief nod toward the butler. Sophia listened quietly as her duties were explained. Cleaning the halls, maintaining order, keeping quiet. She agreed to everything, her voice soft and steady. And then she began. No hesitation, no questions, just quiet, deliberate work. As she dusted the picture frames along the hallway, she paused at one photograph. Charles, his wife, and the twins at the beach. Everyone smiling, unaware of what awaited them. She wiped the frame gently, her reflection merging for a moment with theirs. When she passed through the family wing, she found the twins, two silent boys sitting near the window, their wheelchairs motionless. She stopped, smiled warmly, and said, "Good morning." Neither replied. Neither looked up. But Sophia didn't seem to mind. She moved on, cleaning quietly, humming under her breath. Her presence didn't disturb the silence. It reshaped it. And for the first time in a long while, the air inside Westfield Estate felt just a little less heavy. Sophia Hale's first full day at Westfield Estate began under pale morning light, the kind that makes everything look washed and tired. She moved through the long marble corridors quietly, her small footsteps echoing like soft heartbeats against the stone. No one spoke much to her. The few remaining staff members kept their distance, polite but cautious, like people who had seen too many come and go to bother learning another name. But Sophia didn't seem to notice. She worked with patient rhythm, dusting, folding, and arranging everything with an almost meditative calm. Charles, from his study upstairs, watched her on the security cameras. Not out of interest, out of habit. He expected the usual pattern, a smile on the first day, fear by the second, resignation by the third. But as he leaned closer to the screen, he realized something different. Sophia wasn't reacting. No nervous glances over her shoulder, no flinches at the house's creaks and sighs. She simply worked, humming softly, her voice almost blending with the sound of the rain outside. In the twins' suite, Liam and Ethan sat by the window again, eyes empty, minds far away. Sophia paused at the doorway. She didn't step in right away. She just looked, not with pity, but with quiet understanding. Then she walked over, placed a folded blanket across the arm of Liam's wheelchair, and said, "It might get cold soon." No reply. Not even a glance. Still she smiled. "That's all right," she whispered, more to herself than to them, before leaving the room. For the rest of the morning, Sophia continued her work. But something about her rhythm was different from the workers before her. She didn't clean just to finish tasks. She cleaned like someone restoring a memory. Every surface she touched seemed to soften the house's grief just a little. By midday, Charles came downstairs to meet with a supplier. As he passed the grand hallway, he found Sophia kneeling beside the old family piano. The lid was open, and she was gently wiping the keys with a cloth. He froze mid-step. That piano hadn't been touched since his wife's death. "Leave that," he said sharply. Sophia immediately stopped, rising to her feet. "Of course, sir," but there was no fear in her tone. No apology either, just calm respect. She closed the lid carefully, her hand lingering for a second over the wood before walking away. Charles stood there for a moment, watching her disappear into the next room. He didn't understand why he hadn't fired her on the spot. Maybe because for the first time someone had touched that piano without trembling. Later that afternoon, while Sophia was cleaning the grand dining hall, she heard a small sound behind her, the quiet clatter of a spoon dropping. Turning, she saw Ethan at the doorway. His wheelchair had stopped halfway inside the room. He looked lost, uncertain. Sophia didn't rush toward him. Instead, she bent down, picked up the spoon, and rolled it slowly toward him across the floor. "You dropped something," she said gently. Ethan blinked. His lips parted slightly, but no words came. His small hand reached out for the spoon, shaky, hesitant, but he picked it up. Sophia smiled softly. "Good catch," she said, then turned back to her cleaning. It was the smallest interaction, yet in that vast, haunted mansion, it meant everything. That evening, when most of the staff had retreated to their quarters, Sophia lingered. The rain had stopped and the house was wrapped in a blue-grey hush. She passed the twins' room again and saw the boys still awake, the lamplight dim on their faces. She stepped inside quietly. "You should rest soon," she said. "Long day, huh?" Neither answered. Liam's head was tilted toward the window, eyes reflecting the moonlight. Ethan's fingers fidgeted with the wheel of his chair. Sophia didn't press. She looked around the room, at the untouched toys, the books collecting dust, the untouched colors in a drawer. She walked to the small nightstand between their beds, took a piece of paper from her pocket, and placed it gently there. It was a hand-drawn picture. Two smiling stick-figure boys standing side by side, a small sun above them, and the words written in colored pencil, "You are strong." Sophia didn't say anything else. She simply smiled and left the room. For a long time the twins stared at that drawing. No one spoke. But something flickered behind their eyes, a soft light they hadn't felt in months. Ethan's lips moved slightly, not enough to make a sound. Liam looked down at the drawing again, then, just barely, smiled. The next morning, the nurse who checked on them told Charles, "Sir, I think they smiled yesterday." He didn't believe her. "That's impossible," he muttered, but later, when he reviewed the camera footage from the hallway, he saw it himself. A faint, fragile smile on his son's faces, caught in the corner of the frame, and Sophia walking out of the room with that same calm look. Charles froze, hand still on the mouse. For the first time in weeks, he didn't feel the urge to call the agency and dismiss the new maid. Instead, he sat there staring at the screen, not at the smile, but at the way it had happened, quietly, gently, without asking for anything in return. That night, as the house settled into silence, Charles walked past the twins' room. He stopped at the door. The lights were dim, the boys were asleep, and on the nightstand still lay Sophia's drawing. He stood there longer than he intended, the faint hum of rain against the windows mixing with the sound of his own unsteady breath. For the first time in months, Charles Westfield didn't feel like the house was swallowing him whole. Something, or someone, had shifted the air. Days passed, and the Westfield estate began to change, not through grand gestures or loud laughter, but through something quieter, subtler. It started with music. Sophia Hale began bringing a small portable speaker with her every morning. She placed it on the corner shelf of the family wing, where the twins spent most of their time, and played soft instrumental tunes while she worked. The melodies filled the air, gentle piano notes, faint violins, sounds that seemed to touch the walls, reminding the house what warmth used to feel like. At first, the staff found it odd. Music hadn't been heard inside those halls in nearly a year, but no one complained. Even the butler, who disapproved of everything new, found himself standing still for a few seconds each morning, listening. When Sophia passed the twins, she often hummed along to the music or shared a quiet story from her life. Small, harmless tales about lost umbrellas, burnt breakfasts, or the time she tripped in front of a crowd. Liam and Ethan never replied, but they began watching her more closely. One afternoon, Sophia brought a small box of building blocks into the room. She sat on the floor beside them and began stacking them one by one. "Join me if you want," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. The boys stared, unmoving at first. Then Ethan's hand twitched. He reached for one block, a small blue one, and placed it gently on top of her tower. Liam followed, slower, hesitant but curious. Sophia smiled but said nothing. She let the silence stretch, comfortable and calm. That day the tower grew taller than anyone expected. By evening, the twins were both leaning slightly forward in their chairs, focused, their eyes alive. It wasn't conversation, but it was connection, fragile, new and real. Charles noticed it. He pretended not to, but he did. He stood in the doorway just long enough to see Sophia laughing quietly as Ethan knocked over the tower and Liam groaned, almost teasingly. It was the first sound resembling joy that Charles had heard in his home since the accident. He turned away before anyone saw the emotion rising in his chest. Sophia didn't stop there. Each day she brought something new, a puzzle, a deck of cards, a small toy car. She turned the cold marble floors into a space for play again. She celebrated every small success, clapping softly when Liam managed to spin a wheel on his own, or when Ethan spoke his first word in months. More. It was small, barely audible. But Sophia's eyes filled instantly. More? She repeated, pretending to misunderstand. You mean more music? Ethan blinked, then nodded. Sophia turned up the speaker's volume by just one notch. That same night, Charles watched from the shadows as Sophia wheeled the boys into the dining room. She didn't ask permission, she simply did it. On the long table sat 3 plates, one for each of them. Charles froze at the doorway. No one had set that many plates in over a year. Sophia didn't say a word. She just looked at him, not expectantly but with quiet invitation. Charles hesitated. Then, slowly, he walked forward and took a seat at the head of the table. Dinner was silent at first. Only the faint sound of utensils and the ticking clock filled the room. But silence this time didn't feel cruel. It felt full, like a held breath waiting to exhale. When Ethan accidentally dropped his fork, Sophia reached across, picked it up and said, "That's all right." "Happens to the best of us." Ethan's lip twitched. Not a smile, but close. Liam looked between them and whispered, "Can we have pudding?" Charles's chest tightened. It was the first sentence he had heard from either of them in months. Sophia didn't look at Charles. She just said, "Of course." After dinner, when the boys were asleep, Charles lingered in the dining room alone. He looked at the table, still set for 3, and realized that for the first time since his wife's death, he hadn't eaten alone. The next morning, the house staff began to notice something remarkable. The mansion didn't feel cursed anymore. People greeted each other in the hallways. The kitchen was louder, in a good way. Someone started baking bread again. A faint sweetness hung in the air where, for so long, there had only been dust. Sophia's presence had done what money, science, and discipline never could. She had made the Westfield estate breathe again. Even Charles's routine began to shift. He still spent long hours in his study, but sometimes, just sometimes, he paused his work to listen. When he heard laughter echoing from the family wing, he didn't shut the door. He let it drift in, and yet he said nothing. He didn't thank her, didn't ask her how she was doing. His pride kept him quiet, but his eyes betrayed him every time he passed her in the hallway. He would nod slightly, a gesture she always returned with a soft smile. And that was enough. One evening, after everyone had gone to bed, Charles stood by the window of his study, watching rain blur the city lights below. For months, he had been waiting for a miracle that would never come, a cure, a change, a sign. But maybe, he thought, the miracle wasn't something money could buy. Maybe it had already walked into his house carrying a broken umbrella and a steady heart. He didn't know why, but he found himself whispering into the empty room, "Thank you, Sophia." In the weeks that followed, life inside Westfield Estate began to resemble something close to normal. The air felt lighter. The sound of quiet laughter drifted through the hallways. Even Charles's footsteps, once sharp and impatient, had softened. But beneath that calm surface, Sophia Hale had started to notice something strange, something she couldn't ignore. Every Tuesday and Friday, the twins were taken to the Genovate Research Institute, the private clinic Charles had hired after the accident. The doctors there wore pristine white coats and carried themselves with rehearsed confidence. They spoke in medical terms that sounded intelligent but hollow, promising recovery through advanced neurological stimulation. Sophia always accompanied the boys, assisting the nurses during transfers. She listened carefully during each visit, memorizing everything she could. At first it all seemed legitimate. Structured routines, polished reports and expensive equipment humming softly in the background. But then she started seeing the changes. After each appointment, Liam and Ethan returned weaker. Their eyes were dimmer, their movements slower. They would fall asleep on the car ride home and barely wake for dinner. Sometimes they shivered, even under blankets. Other times their skin turned pale as chalk. At first, Sophia thought it was part of the recovery process. The doctors said the body needed to adjust to the medication. But each week their condition worsened. What used to be small signs of improvement, slight finger movement, faint smiles, started disappearing again. The progress they had made since her arrival was fading. Sophia tried to stay calm. She wasn't a doctor. She told herself she could be overreacting. Still, she watched, observed, and quietly took notes in her head. One afternoon, she asked the clinic nurse, "Is it normal for them to be this tired afterward?" The nurse's answer was mechanical, completely expected. "It's just the body responding to the treatment." But Sophia's gut screamed otherwise. At home, she began writing things down, dates, doses, symptoms. Her notes were methodical, hidden inside a plain notebook she kept under her bed. She wrote everything: the boys' fevers, their sleep patterns, their appetite, every small detail that didn't add up. Days turned into weeks, and the pattern became impossible to ignore. The boys always worsened after their Genovate appointments. When doses were delayed or reduced, they seemed more awake, more themselves. One evening, Sophia found Ethan sitting near the piano again. His eyes were half open, unfocused. His hands trembled when he tried to reach the keys. She crouched beside him and whispered, "You're tired again, aren't you?" He didn't reply. Just a slow blink. Sophia's heart tightened. Something was deeply wrong. The next morning, during another clinic visit, she tried to ask the head doctor, a tall man with a smile too rehearsed to be kind, whether the dosage could be reduced. He didn't even look at her. "You're the housekeeper, correct?" "Yes, but then perhaps it's best you leave the medical questions to us," he said smoothly, already turning away. The dismissiveness burned through her. She bit her lip and said nothing more. That night she gathered her courage and approached Charles. He was in his study, surrounded by files and half-finished coffee cups. "Mr. Westfield," she began quietly, "may I speak with you?" He didn't look up. "About what?" "It's about the twins. I've noticed their reactions after treatments. I think something might be—" He stopped her with a sharp motion of his hand. "Sophia, I've heard enough from professionals to know what's happening. Recovery takes time. I understand, but—" He finally looked up, his expression hard. "Science knows what it's doing. Don't start doubting the only thing keeping them alive." Sophia froze. For a second she saw a flicker of fear in his eyes, the kind that hides behind anger. "I only want to help," she said softly. "Then do your job," he replied, turning back to his desk. She left without another word. That night, as the mansion fell silent, Sophia sat on the edge of her bed, staring at her notebook. Her hands trembled, but her mind was clear. If Charles wouldn't listen, she would have to find the truth herself. She began writing more obsessively, recording every reaction in precise detail: pulse, skin temperature, even the hours of sleep. She made sketches of their posture before and after treatments. The notebook became her silent witness. Every entry deepened her fear and her resolve. Soon she noticed a terrifying correlation. The boys' fevers spiked exactly 4 hours after each dose. The color of their lips changed slightly each time. The pattern was too exact to be coincidence. One night, when the rest of the house was asleep, Sophia crept into the study. She needed answers. Using the printer, she began searching quietly for the Genovate Institute online. The first few pages showed glossy articles and awards. But deeper into the search results, buried behind legal disclaimers, she found something else. Small news reports, lawsuits, archived medical warnings. Her blood ran cold as she read Genovate had been fined before, twice, for unauthorized neurological testing. Victims had reported severe motor regression and unexplained fatigue. The official statement had called them isolated incidents. Sophia knew better. She printed what she could. a few pages at a time, hiding them under her clothes before returning to her room. Then she made a choice. If the system wouldn't protect the boys, she would. The next day, when she handed Liam his water, she delayed the morning dose of medication just by an hour. That afternoon, both boys were more alert than they had been all week. Sophia said nothing, but her heart raced. That night, as she tucked them into bed, Ethan whispered something so faint she almost didn't hear it. "Thank you." She looked at him, startled. His eyes were clearer than before. In that moment, Sophia knew her instincts were right, and that she was now walking a dangerous line. From that night on, Sophia Hale became more than a housekeeper. She became a silent investigator. Each day she played her role as if nothing had changed. She laughed with the twins, served meals, and greeted the staff with the same warm calmness everyone admired. But behind that composed smile she was collecting evidence, one observation, one page, one hidden truth at a time. Her notebook had grown thick with data. Every line told the same story. The more medication Liam and Ethan received, the worse their condition became. When doses were skipped, even for a few hours, the improvement was visible. Their eyes brightened. Their hands stopped trembling. They spoke more. Sophia began to mark these skipped days on a secret calendar, using colored dots only she could decode. The pattern that emerged terrified her, but she couldn't confront Charles Westfield again, not without proof. So she stayed silent and watched. During each trip to the Genovate Research Institute, she kept her expression blank but her mind alert. She noticed how the doctors whispered when Charles wasn't looking, how the nurses avoided eye contact when handing over the vials. She memorized every label, every dosage, every coded name on the bottles. Then, late at night, when the mansion slept, she searched those names online, quietly, carefully. Some of the drugs didn't even exist in public databases. Others appeared only in obscure research trials that had no published results. Sophia's unease turned into fear. One afternoon, after a routine treatment, Ethan vomited minutes after taking his pills. Later that same day, Liam suffered a nosebleed that wouldn't stop for 10 minutes. When Sophia reported it, the clinic nurse brushed it off. "Perfectly normal for high-intensity recovery phases," the nurse said, but Sophia could see it. The boys weren't healing. They were being drained. Her hands trembled that evening as she wrote in her notebook, "Not recovery, reaction. They're hurting them." She stared at the words for a long time, her pen frozen mid-air. That night, she hid her notes deeper under the floorboard near her dresser. Then she began printing documents at the mansion again, just a few at a time, labeling each one with dates and initials. The printer's low hum became the heartbeat of her secret war. The next few weeks were torture. She had to pretend everything was normal while living with the constant fear of being caught. Every sound outside her door made her flinch. Every time Charles called her name, her chest tightened, but she refused to stop. During one therapy session, Liam tried to move his fingers but couldn't. His face crumpled, frustration, sadness, exhaustion all at once. Sophia knelt beside him, holding his trembling hand. "Hey," she said softly, "it's okay. You don't give up, remember?" He looked at her, a faint tear slipping down his cheek. "I'm tired," he whispered. "I know," she replied, her voice breaking. "But you're stronger than they think." She didn't just mean his body. She meant his spirit, the one the world had written off too soon. That night, Sophia skipped another dose. Just one. The next morning, both boys were alert, even laughing over a toy car on the floor. She wrote it down, circled it twice, drew a line to the date of the missed pill. It wasn't coincidence anymore. It was proof. But the closer she came to the truth, the greater the risk became. She started noticing subtle changes in the staff. One nurse, a woman she didn't recognize, began showing up during every clinic visit, watching her too closely. Another staff member seemed to linger near her room longer than necessary, and one morning she found her notebook drawer slightly ajar, even though she was sure she had locked it. Sophia's pulse pounded as she rechecked every page. Nothing was missing. Not yet. But she knew she was being watched. That night she stayed awake until dawn, her back against the wall, her notebook clutched to her chest. "Just a little longer," she whispered to herself. "A little longer and I'll have enough." She wasn't sure what enough meant. Enough evidence to convince Charles, enough courage to go to the authorities, or enough strength to protect the boys if things went wrong. But she knew one thing for certain. She couldn't let them suffer another day without answers. The next week, Charles called a late-night meeting in the study with the clinic's lead physician. Sophia served tea quietly and stood near the door, pretending to be invisible. The conversation was brief, too brief. Charles asked, "When will they walk again?" The doctor smiled, smooth and polished. "Progress is steady. Patience, Mr. Westfield. Recovery is never linear." "But they're weaker," Charles pressed. "Temporary regression," the doctor said confidently. "Trust the process." Sophia caught his glance, quick, sharp and cold. It sent a chill through her. When the meeting ended, she slipped into the hallway. Her heartbeat was loud in her ears. She didn't know what frightened her more, the doctor's words or the way Charles accepted them so easily. Back in her room, she added 3 new words to her notebook. "They're lying." All of them. By now, her notes filled more than 50 pages. Detailed symptoms, dosage logs, dates, even sketches of drug containers. And yet she couldn't act. Not yet. Not until she had something undeniable, something that even Charles couldn't ignore. She decided to watch what would happen if she delayed one full treatment. 2 days later, she told the clinic that the boys were sick and couldn't attend. She expected them to insist. Instead, they said, "Understood. Resume when ready." That was all. No questions. No concern. The silence on their end was the loudest alarm bell yet. Over the next 24 hours, the twins showed signs of recovery. More movement in their fingers, brighter eyes, better coordination. Sophia's fear turned to rage. It was no longer a suspicion. It was a truth too horrifying to accept. She stayed by their beds that night, watching them sleep, her notebook open beside her. "I'll fix this," she whispered into the dark. "I promise you. No matter what it takes." It happened on a quiet Thursday afternoon. Charles Westfield was walking down the second-floor hallway when he noticed something unusual. Sophia Hale's door was slightly open. She never left it that way. The housekeeper's room was always neat, locked and private. Curiosity, or maybe suspicion, pushed him closer. He hesitated for a moment before stepping inside. The air smelled faintly of lavender soap and printer ink. Everything was perfectly in place. The folded blanket on the bed, her uniform neatly hung on the door hook, her shoes aligned near the rug. Except for one thing, a small wooden box lay half hidden under her bed, the lid not fully closed. Charles bent down and pulled it out. Inside were dozens of folded papers, printed documents, scribbled notes, pages filled with columns, dates and medical terms. At first he didn't understand what he was looking at. Then his eyes caught the names written across the top of each page. Genovate Research Institute, Observations Medication Response Log, Ethan and Liam Charles, froze. He flipped through the pages. Paragraphs of detailed handwriting stared back at him. Fevers, tremors, missed dosages, behavioral changes, all meticulously recorded. He saw graphs, sketches, and even copied excerpts from online reports about Genovate's past lawsuits. Each page was evidence, against the very clinic he trusted most. The realization hit him like a blow. She had been investigating him. Investigating the treatment. His face darkened with anger, or maybe panic. His hand trembled as he grabbed the stack of notes. Moments later, his voice thundered across the hall. "Sophia!" She appeared at the door, startled but calm, wiping her hands on a cleaning rag. When she saw what he was holding, her heart stopped. "Where did you get that?" she whispered. "Where?" he repeated, his voice sharp with disbelief. "In my house, in my son's rooms. You've been keeping secret records." "Mr. Westfield, please." He stepped forward, his face red, his voice shaking. "You think you know better than doctors? Than me? You went through my files, you printed things behind my back. I had to," she said, her voice breaking for the first time. "They're hurting the boys. I've seen it with my own eyes. The medicine, it's enough," Charles snapped, cutting her off. "You've crossed every line." Tears welled in Sophia's eyes, but she didn't back down. "Sir, listen to me. Every time they take that drug, they get worse. When they don't, they're stronger. I have proof." He slammed the box shut. "You're just like the rest of them. You pretend to care, then turn this house into your stage. Do you think I don't see what you're doing? Trying to make me doubt the only people trying to save my children." Her voice softened. "I don't want to make you doubt anyone. I just want you to look at the truth." "The truth?" His laugh was bitter. "The truth is that my sons are alive because of Genovate. You're a maid. You clean floors. You don't question science." Sophia's tears finally fell. "Then don't believe me. Believe them. Watch what's happening. Look at your sons." But Charles was past listening. Rage mixed with guilt made him cruel. "Pack your things. You're finished here. Please, now." Within minutes, the guards arrived at the door. They didn't speak, just stood waiting for orders. Sophia's hands shook as she looked around the room that had become her home. The walls, the bed, the notebook, all of it felt suddenly distant. As she turned to leave, she saw Liam and Ethan in the hallway, both in their wheelchairs, tears streaming down their faces. "Papa, don't!" Liam cried. "Don't send her away." "She helped us," Ethan sobbed, trying to wheel himself forward, his arms trembling. Charles's jaw tightened, his voice breaking slightly as he said, "Enough. Go back to your room." But the boys didn't move. Their small voices pleaded again and again, echoing down the marble hall. "Please, Dad, please." Sophia knelt in front of them, her voice trembling but calm. "It's all right," she whispered. "You're going to be okay." Then, turning to Charles, she said quietly, "One day you'll see I wasn't your enemy." Charles couldn't meet her eyes. The guards escorted her toward the main door. The twins cried louder, their voices raw and desperate. Staff members stood frozen, unsure whether to intervene or vanish. As the doors opened, a cold gust of wind rushed through the hall, scattering a few loose papers from Sophia's box across the floor. One page slid toward Charles's feet. He picked it up without thinking. It read, "Day 42, missed morning dose." Both children alert. Ethan smiled today. He crumpled it in his hand, but the words burned into his mind. The sound of the front doors closing echoed through the mansion like a final heartbeat. After that, silence returned, the kind that pressed on your chest and made you forget how to breathe. That night, no one spoke. Dinner went untouched. Charles locked himself in his study, staring at the documents he hadn't thrown away. He told himself she was wrong, that she had betrayed him, that her emotions had clouded her reason. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw that one line again. Ethan smiled today. The next morning, the nurse entered the twins' room carrying their medication tray. "Time for your pills, boys," she said softly, but neither child moved. Liam turned his face away. Ethan pushed the cup aside. "I don't want it," he whispered. "What did you say?" the nurse asked. "I said I don't want it," Ethan shouted, the loudest sound that house had heard in months. The nurse, alarmed, reported it immediately. Charles rushed upstairs, his face pale. "What's going on?" "They're refusing their medicine," the nurse said. Charles knelt beside them. "You have to take it, please." But both boys stared at him with silent defiance. He tried again, his voice trembling. "This will help you." Ethan looked him in the eyes for the first time in months. She said it hurts us. Charles froze. His throat tightened. He wanted to deny it, to tell them they were wrong, but the words wouldn't come. For hours the boys refused everything. Doctors called. The clinic insisted. Nothing worked. When night fell, Charles sat alone in his office, his hands covering his face. The house felt colder than ever. The faint smell of Sophia's lavender still lingered in the hallway, a ghost of something pure that he had driven away. For the first time in years, Charles Westfield wasn't sure if he had done the right thing. After being thrown out of the Westfield estate, Sophia Hale didn't go home. She couldn't. Every corner of her mind echoed with the twins' voices calling after her, their cries, their trembling hands reaching toward her as the guards dragged her away. Those sounds clung to her like bruises. That night, she walked aimlessly through the rain-soaked streets of Los Angeles hills. Her thin coat was drenched, her hair plastered to her face, but she didn't care. The only thing that mattered now was finding proof, real proof. The next morning, she found herself in a small public library. It was nearly empty, just the sound of rain tapping against the windows and the faint hum of an old heater. She sat down at a dusty computer, opened a browser, and typed Genovate Research Institute scandals into the search bar. Most results were sanitized, full of praise. Glowing reviews, awards, and newspaper features about medical innovation. But after hours of scrolling, buried deep within archived pages, she found what she was looking for. A name, Dr. Martin Avery, a retired scientist who had once worked at Genovate before resigning under ethical disagreement. Sophia followed the trail, old interviews, minor medical reports, half-deleted online posts. Finally, she found a current phone listing for him in Santa Clarita, just a few towns away. Without hesitation, she used her last bit of cash to take a bus. When she arrived, the world was painted in grey fog. The house was small, quiet, and surrounded by uncut grass. An old man answered the door. His hair was white, his eyes sharp, the eyes of someone who'd seen too much. "Dr. Avery?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Yes," he said cautiously. "Do I know you?" "I used to work for a family that trusted Genovate with their children's care. I think they're being poisoned." He studied her for a moment, then opened the door wider. "Come in." Inside, the living room was cluttered with papers, research notes, and empty coffee cups. Sophia sat on the edge of the couch while Dr. Avery pulled out a box of old files. "I left Genovate because of what they were doing," he said quietly. "They claimed they were testing regenerative compounds, but what they were really doing was experimenting with neural suppressants, chemicals that block nerve responses under the pretense of stimulation." Sophia's stomach turned. "You mean they were making patients worse?" He nodded slowly. "Not just worse, dependent. The longer the treatments continued, the less the body could respond naturally. It's a trap, one that guarantees lifelong patience and unlimited funding." He opened a folder and slid a few papers toward her, chemical analysis reports, trial summaries, signed statements. "I couldn't stop them. But I kept these." Sophia read the first page. Every line was a knife to her chest. Irreversible motor suppression, synthetic dependency, false recovery indicators. Her hands shook. "Then Liam and Ethan are lucky to still be alive," he finished. "If you hadn't noticed the pattern, they'd be paralyzed permanently by now." Sophia's throat tightened. She had imagined the worst, but seeing it in writing made it real. "Can we expose them?" Dr. Avery nodded slowly. "If we have their current prescription logs or sample vials, yes. I can test them. I don't have samples," Sophia said, "but I have records, pages of them." "That's a start," he replied. "Bring them to me." That night, Sophia returned to her small apartment, still soaked from the rain. She laid Dr. Avery's papers on her table, staring at them as if they were living things. Each page carried weight, not just ink and data, but hope. She stayed up until dawn, reading every line, committing them to memory. Then she packed the documents into a folder, wrapped it in plastic, and placed it inside her bag. She knew what she had to do next. She was going back to Westfield Estate. 2 days later, she made her move. She called the mansion from a payphone and spoke to one of the younger guards. Her voice was calm but urgent. "Tell Mr. Westfield I'm coming to fix what the clinic did. The children's lives are in danger." The guard hesitated. "Ma'am, you're not allowed here." Sophia's tone sharpened. "If you stop me, you'll be responsible when they die. Check the papers I bring first, then decide." The guard fell silent. Then, after a moment, he said quietly, "I'll open the gate." When Sophia arrived, the mansion loomed against the grey sky like a shadow. Rain slicked the driveway, lightning flashing across the iron gates. She gripped her bag tighter, her shoes squelching in the mud as she walked toward the entrance. Inside, the halls were dim. The silence was worse than before, not the peaceful kind, but heavy and hollow. Sophia didn't wait for permission. She went straight to the twins' suite. The moment she entered, her breath caught. Liam and Ethan lay in bed, both pale and feverish, their lips dry, their breathing shallow. Their eyes flickered open weakly when they saw her. "Miss Sophia." Liam whispered, barely audible. "I'm here," she said, rushing to their side. "It's going to be all right." She touched their foreheads, both burning with fever. Panic rose in her throat. "Who gave them medicine?" she demanded, looking at the nurse nearby. "They've been following Dr. Raymond's orders," the nurse said defensively. "Get out," Sophia snapped. Now, when the nurse hesitated, she raised her voice. "Out!" Terrified, the woman fled the room. Sophia immediately called Dr. Avery, using the hospital line. Within 40 minutes, he arrived with a small black case of medical equipment. After a quick examination, his expression hardened. "This isn't illness, it's chemical toxicity. They're being poisoned." Sophia showed him the folder she'd brought. He flipped through the reports, nodded grimly, then whispered, "You did the right thing." The guards appeared again at the doorway. "Miss Hale, Mr. Westfield said you're not allowed here." Sophia stood tall. "Then he can fire me again later. But if you stop me now, you'll be complicit in murder." Something in her voice, sharp, unyielding, made them hesitate. When the ambulance arrived, Sophia held the boys' hands tightly as paramedics worked around them. "You're safe now," she whispered, brushing the hair from their foreheads. "I promise." Inside the ambulance, the boys drifted in and out of consciousness. The siren wailed through the storm as Sophia sat between them, gripping both of their hands. Then, in a voice faint but clear, Ethan murmured, "Mom?" Sophia froze. Liam echoed, barely conscious. "Mommy?" Her eyes filled instantly, but she didn't cry. She just squeezed their hands tighter and whispered, "I'm here, my loves. I'm not leaving you ever again." The paramedics exchanged silent glances. None of them spoke. They didn't need to. In that moment, drenched in rain, surrounded by flashing lights, Sophia Hale became something more than a housekeeper. She became their mother. The next morning, Charles Westfield's car rolled to a stop outside the gates of Westfield Estate. He had returned early from a business trip, but what greeted him wasn't the calm order he was used to. Police cars lined the driveway. Blue lights flashed against the mansion's stone walls. Reporters shouted from behind the gates, their cameras pointed like weapons at the front door. Charles stepped out, confusion tightening his chest. "What's going on?" 2 officers approached him immediately. "Mr. Westfield?" one asked. "We need to speak with you." Inside, chaos unfolded. The staff stood clustered in the foyer, whispering nervously. In the center of it all stood Sophia Hale, soaked from the rain, exhausted but steady. In her hands, she held a thick folder. The moment Charles saw her, his face hardened. "What are you doing here?" Sophia didn't flinch. She handed the folder to the lead officer. "These are the original reports. They prove everything." The officer flipped through the documents, drug analyses, dosage logs and printed scientific reports signed by Dr. Martin Avery. Charles's voice broke through the noise. "What is this?" Before Sophia could answer, one of the officers turned to him. "Mr. Westfield, your sons were given unapproved neurological compounds, toxins disguised as recovery medication. The clinic's lead physician has been arrested. The lab is under federal investigation." Charles froze. "That's not possible." "It's true," Sophia said softly, her voice trembling but clear. "They weren't healing them, they were using them." As the officer continued explaining, Charles's gaze fell on the papers in the officer's hands. Every line of Sophia's handwriting stared back at him, her notes, her warnings, her truth. He felt his knees weaken. Dear God! The television in the background switched channels automatically as one of the staff turned up the volume. A news anchor's voice filled the room. "Breaking news. Federal authorities have uncovered illegal human testing at Genovate Research Institute. Patients, including children, were subjected to unapproved drug trials, causing long-term nerve damage." The screen flashed images of the Genovate building surrounded by police, scientists in handcuffs, boxes of evidence being loaded into vans. Then came a photo, Sophia's handwritten notes held up for the camera. Charles couldn't look away. For months he had believed in the clinic. Trusted them with his sons' lives. Trusted them more than the one woman who had actually seen the truth. His breath came in shallow bursts. "Where are they?" he asked quietly. Sophia's expression softened. "The hospital. They're safe now. You should come." Charles didn't hesitate. He left without another word, his car tires skidding across the wet driveway as he sped towards St. Helena Medical Center. At the hospital, the world smelled of antiseptic and rain. Charles pushed through the corridors, his heart pounding in his throat. A nurse led him to a quiet room near the end of the hall. When he stepped inside, time stopped. Liam and Ethan lay asleep in twin beds, pale but peaceful. Beside them sat Sophia, her eyes closed from exhaustion, one hand resting on each of the boys. For a long moment, Charles didn't move. He just stood there, the man who had destroyed everything, staring at the woman who had saved it all. He walked forward quietly, his footsteps soft against the tile. When he spoke, his voice was almost a whisper. "I'm sorry." Sophia didn't open her eyes. She just exhaled slowly and said, "They're safe now. That's all that matters." Charles wanted to say more, to explain, to justify, but nothing felt right. So he just stood there, guilt filling the space between them like a living thing. A doctor entered the room then, glancing at the monitors. "They're stable," he said. "The toxins are clearing from their system. If recovery continues, they may regain full function." Charles's eyes widened. "You mean they might walk again?" "There's a real chance," the doctor confirmed. "Their nerves are responding well now that the drugs are gone." Charles turned to Sophia, his throat tight. "You were right," he said, voice cracking. "All along you were right." She finally looked at him, not with anger, but with quiet sadness. "I didn't want to be right," she said softly. He nodded, unable to speak. For the next few hours the room remained silent except for the steady hum of hospital machines. Nurses moved in and out quietly, checking vitals. Sophia stayed by the boys' side the entire time. Charles watched her. The way she touched their hair, whispered their names, smiled even when her eyes were red from crying. He realized then that she had done something no doctor, no amount of money, no science could achieve. She had given his children their life back. Outside, the world was exploding. News vans crowded the hospital entrance. Reporters shouted over each other as police carried boxes of confiscated drugs out of Genovate's labs. Headlines spread across every screen. "Billionaire's children, victims of medical fraud. Genovate exposed. Poison in the name of progress. Maid's courage uncovers truth." Sophia's name appeared in every report. Photos of her notes, her timelines, even her sketches of medication bottles became public evidence, but she didn't care about recognition. She sat quietly beside the twins' beds, whispering to them as they slept. "Rest now," she murmured. "You're free." When Charles returned from speaking with the police, he didn't stand tall or proud. He walked slowly, the weight of months, years, pressing on his shoulders. He stopped by Sophia's chair, looking down at her. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said softly, "but I'll spend the rest of my life earning it." Sophia didn't answer immediately. She looked at the boys, then back at him. "Then start by being here," she said. "Really here. That's all they ever wanted." Charles nodded. His voice broke when he whispered, "I will." He sat beside her in silence, both of them watching the slow rise and fall of the twins' chests. Outside, the rain had finally stopped. The nightmare was over. For the first time in years, peace had entered Westfield Estate, not the kind born from silence, but from truth, and though it would take time to rebuild what was lost, the first steps had already begun. In that small hospital room, under the soft hum of machines, where a broken family started to heal. For days, Charles Westfield hardly left the hospital. He stayed near his sons' beds, sleeping upright in the chair, his suit wrinkled and his face lined with exhaustion. The only moments of peace came when he looked at Liam and Ethan, breathing steadily now, their color returning. Sophia Hale remained by their side, calm and composed even through her fatigue. She didn't rest until the doctor said the boys were out of danger. Each morning, Dr. Martin Avery stopped by with updates. "The toxins are almost gone," he explained. "Their systems are recovering faster than expected." "Will there be lasting damage?" Charles asked. Dr. Avery hesitated. "It's too early to say, but you should know. Without Sophia's timing, it might have been irreversible." Charles looked at her, words trapped behind guilt. She didn't look back. By the third day, the boys began to stir. Ethan opened his eyes first. His gaze moved across the room, settling on Sophia. "Mommy?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. Sophia froze, her heart twisting. "Yes, sweetheart. I'm right here." Liam's eyes fluttered open next. He turned his head, searching the room until he saw Charles. "Dad?" Charles stepped forward quickly, kneeling beside the bed. "I'm here, son. I'm not going anywhere." For a long moment, the four of them stayed that way, a broken family stitched together by silence and forgiveness. The doctors entered soon after, performing their checks and smiling softly. "They're strong," one said. "Stronger than most adults I've seen." When they left, Charles looked at Sophia. "Thank you doesn't even come close," he said quietly. Sophia shook her head. "You don't need to thank me. Just promise you'll never let anyone hurt them again." He nodded. "Never." Over the next week, recovery came in small, miraculous steps. The boys could move their toes, then their feet. Then, with help, they began to sit up. Each motion brought gasps from nurses and tears from Sophia. Charles watched from the corner, barely breathing, terrified it might all fade like a dream. But the improvements continued. Dr. Avery called it neural revival, something he hadn't seen in years. "They're responding faster than expected," he said. "The human body heals when surrounded by care. You've given them that." Sophia smiled faintly. "They gave it back to me." 2 weeks later, the hospital discharged them. The drive back to Westfield Estate was silent, but it was a different kind of silence, peaceful, not heavy. When the gates opened, sunlight spilled over the mansion's facade. For the first time, it didn't look like a prison. Inside, the staff waited nervously. Everyone had heard what happened: the arrest, the scandal, the news stories. Some even cried when they saw Sophia stepping through the doors again. Charles gathered everyone in the grand hall. "From today forward," he said, his voice steady, "this house is no longer a place of sorrow. It's a home again, because of her." He turned to Sophia. "She's not just an employee. She's family. She's the reason my sons are alive." Tears filled her eyes, but she stayed quiet. That evening, Charles signed new documents, cutting all ties with Genovate Research Institute and any affiliate under its name. He hired a new team of doctors vetted personally by Dr. Avery. Then he did something he hadn't done in years. He moved into the family dining room for dinner. There were 4 plates this time, 1 for each of them. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. The warmth in the room said everything. When the meal ended, Charles found Sophia standing by the window, looking out at the garden where the twins used to play. "It's strange," she said softly. "When I first came here, the house felt like it couldn't breathe. Now it's alive again," he nodded. "Because you brought it back," she smiled faintly. "No, they did. I just reminded them how." In the following weeks, the twins' progress amazed everyone. Their therapy sessions became part of the household routine. Stretches, balance exercises, laughter echoing through hallways that once held only echoes of grief. Each morning began with Sophia's soft music playing through the house, and each evening ended with the twins giggling as they raced their wheelchairs across the polished floors. The mansion had life again. Charles, still quiet, began to change too. He started helping during therapy sessions, holding the boys' hands as they tried to stand. He laughed again, an unfamiliar sound that made even the staff smile. One morning, while watching Ethan stack wooden blocks during therapy, he whispered to Sophia, "Do you ever think about how close we came to losing everything?" She looked at him, her expression gentle but serious. "Sometimes the only way to save something is to lose it first." He nodded slowly, understanding more than he could say. A month later, Charles held a press conference in the mansion's courtyard. Reporters crowded the gates again, but this time it wasn't for scandal. He announced the creation of the Westfield Foundation, dedicated to helping children affected by medical negligence. "It's time to rebuild trust, not in wealth or status, but in humanity," he said. "No parent should endure what I did. No child should suffer for someone's profit." As cameras flashed, Sophia stood quietly in the background, watching him speak. She didn't want the spotlight. The twins were her reward. Later that evening, as the house emptied of guests, Charles approached her. "I meant what I said," he told her. "You're part of this family now, not because of what you did, but because of who you are." Sophia smiled, tears in her eyes. "Then let's make sure we never forget how we got here." He nodded, his voice barely a whisper. Never again. That night, the mansion glowed with golden light. The sound of the twins' laughter filled every room. The air was no longer heavy. It was alive. The ghosts of guilt had finally lifted. And for the first time since tragedy struck, Charles Westfield slept peacefully, not as a man haunted by loss, but as a father who had found redemption through love he didn't deserve but was given anyway. Months passed. The dark cloud that had hung over Westfield Estate was gone. The halls that once echoed with silence now carried laughter, music, and the steady hum of new life. Every morning, Sophia Hale opened the curtains of the family wing, letting sunlight pour into the rooms. Liam and Ethan had grown stronger, their arms firm, their smiles brighter, their spirits unshakable. Therapy had become a ritual. Each day, Sophia and the medical team helped them practice standing, taking small steps with support. At first, their legs trembled violently, but every time they fell, they got up. Every time they doubted, Sophia whispered, "You can do this." By now, even Charles Westfield had joined in. He was no longer the distant figure watching from the shadows. He was present, holding the boys' walkers, counting their steps, celebrating each tiny victory. And though the road to full recovery was long, there was no fear left in that house, only hope. Then, one quiet morning, the miracle happened. Sophia was arranging pillows on the living room couch when she heard movement behind her, a slow, deliberate rhythm she hadn't heard before. She turned, expecting to see one of the nurses. Instead, she saw Liam and Ethan. Both of them were rolling into the room, each pushing his own wheelchair, their hands steady, their faces glowing with excitement. "Mommy!" Ethan called out, his voice full of life. "We did it!" Sophia froze. Her breath caught in her throat as she dropped the pillow and fell to her knees. You pushed yourselves?" Liam grinned. "All the way from our room." Tears filled her eyes. She covered her mouth, trying to steady herself, but the sob broke free anyway. Pure, uncontrollable joy. Charles stood at the doorway, speechless. He had been watching from the hall, unsure whether to step forward or just let the moment happen. He finally walked in, his eyes glistening, his voice low. "Look at you both," Ethan laughed, spinning his chair slightly. "We told you we could." Liam looked up at his father with quiet pride. "We're getting stronger, right?" Charles knelt beside them, placing a hand on each of their shoulders. "Stronger than you know." Then, in front of everyone, the boys, the staff and Sophia, he turned to her. His voice trembled. "You didn't just save them, Sophia. You saved me." For a second she couldn't move. The weight of his words sank in, and before she could stop herself she was crying again, the kind of tears that don't come from pain, but from peace. Charles reached out and hugged her, a gesture simple but heavy with meaning. The boys clapped and laughed, their voices echoing through the mansion like sunlight breaking through clouds. It was a moment that no one in that house would ever forget. Later that afternoon, news broke again. The court had finally ruled against Genovate Research Institute. The company was found guilty of medical fraud, negligence, and illegal human experimentation. Former patients came forward to share their stories. Families who had been silenced for years were finally being heard. Dr. Martin Avery's testimony became the cornerstone of the case, and Sophia's notebook was cited as critical evidence. Headlines filled the nation's screens. "Justice for the Westfield twins." "Whistleblower Maid exposes corporate medical abuse." "Courage wins. Love over science." Charles refused most interview requests. He gave only one short public statement. "My sons are alive today because of one woman's courage. Her name is Sophia Hale, and I will spend the rest of my life honoring what she taught us, that love saves more lives than money ever will." The media called it the Westfield miracle, but inside the mansion there was no talk of miracles, only gratitude. Weeks later, life settled into a new rhythm. Sophia was officially moved into a room next to the twins' suite. Her nameplate read, "Sophia Hale, Family Care Director." But to Liam and Ethan, she would always be Mommy Sophia. Charles Maid. Sure, she was included in every decision, medical, educational, even personal. They planned together, ate together, lived as a family. Every morning the smell of pancakes and laughter filled the kitchen. Every night, stories echoed through the halls as Sophia tucked the boys in, their small hands gripping hers tightly before falling asleep. Sometimes Charles joined them in the garden after dinner. He'd sit beside Sophia on the old stone bench, watching the boys play. The sunset washed the house in gold, and for the first time the world felt whole again. They rarely spoke about the past anymore. They didn't need to. The pain had already served its purpose. It had rebuilt them. One evening, Charles stood in the playroom doorway, watching as Sophia helped the boys set up a board game. Their laughter filled the air, bright and effortless. Sophia caught him watching and smiled. "You're allowed to join, you know." He chuckled softly and walked over. "Only if I get to win once in a while." Ethan grinned. "No promises, Dad." The game began, playful teasing, rolling dice, counting tiles. It was simple, ordinary, perfect. Charles looked around the room, the same room that had once been filled with wheelchairs and sorrow. Now it was full of warmth, light, and life. He realized then that what Sophia had given him wasn't just his son's recovery. It was redemption, a second chance at being a father, at being human. He leaned back in his chair, smiling as the boys argued over whose turn it was. His heart, once so heavy, felt light. Outside, the night sky stretched clear and endless. The mansion that had once been a monument to grief now stood as a symbol of healing. And in that golden quiet, Charles finally understood something he had missed all along. The greatest miracles don't come from science or wealth. They come from faith, from compassion, and from people who refuse to give up when everyone else walks away. He looked at Sophia, her laughter soft and genuine, and whispered under his breath, "Thank you." She didn't hear it, or maybe she did, because at that moment she looked up and met his eyes, smiling the kind of smile that says everything words never could. The Westfields were whole again. The silence was gone, and love, patient, selfless, unstoppable, had reclaimed its place inside those walls.